Here is the question I want you to sit with before we go anywhere. Not as a rhetorical device, as an actual question that the official record of this case has not answered. If Houston Police Department officers were dispatched to 2113 Kingston Street at 5:25 in the afternoon on May 4th, 2026, and those officers entered that home and found 4 people who were clearly no longer alive, why does the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences official death record list the time of death for all 4 members of the Mitchell family as 6:11 in the evening? That is 46 minutes after officers arrived. 46 minutes between the moment trained law enforcement personnel walked through that front door and the moment the official record says this family died. No authority, not HPD, not the medical examiner's office, not any official spokesperson connected to this investigation has offered a public explanation for that gap. It is in the record. It has not been addressed. And it is the detail that makes this case more complicated than almost any coverage of it has acknowledged. That gap is where this investigation starts today, and it is where it ends. Everything between those 2 points is the story of how a family that gave every visible signal of being at the height of what they had built ended up as 4 entries in a forensic sciences report on a Monday evening in May of 2026, in a way that the record has still not fully explained. If you are new to this channel, True Crime Vault is where we follow these cases past the headline cycle. We do not stop when the media moves on. We stay with the record, we track every verified development, and when something in an official document does not add up, we say so clearly and we say why. If that is the kind of coverage you are looking for, subscribe right now and hit the notification bell. You will not miss a single update on this case. Hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that cases like this deserve more attention than they are getting. Drop a comment below with the one thing in this case that you cannot stop thinking about. This community catches things that individual investigators miss. Now let's build this out from the beginning. Before we get to the people inside that home, I want to establish exactly what the official record says and exactly where it stops. Because the gap between those 2 things is the engine of this entire investigation. Houston Police Department officers were dispatched to the address on Kingston Street in the River Oaks neighborhood at approximately 5:25 in the afternoon. They entered the residence. They found 4 deceased members of the same family. HPD subsequently named Matthew Mitchell, 52 years old, as the suspect, stating that evidence at the scene indicated he had shot his wife and 2 children before shooting himself. The Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences conducted its official examination and confirmed the following. Thy Mitchell, 39 years old, cause of death, homicide by gunshot wound to the head. Maya Mitchell, 8 years old, cause of death, homicide by gunshot wound to the head. Maxwell Mitchell, 4 years old, cause of death, homicide by gunshot wound to the head. Matthew Mitchell, 52 years old, cause of death, suicide by self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Official time of death for all 4 members of the family, 6:11 p.m. on Monday, May 4th, 2026. That is the official record. Now here is where the official record creates a question it does not answer. The time of death documented by the medical examiner, 6:11 p.m., comes 46 minutes after officers were already inside that home. In standard investigative procedure, the medical examiner's documented time of death in a case like this reflects the time the examiner officially records the deaths, which may differ from the time officers arrived. That is one possible reading. But investigators themselves have indicated, through statements to reporters and through the trajectory of the investigation, that they believe the deaths did not occur on Monday at all. They believe the Mitchell family died on Sunday night, May 3rd, potentially nearly 24 hours before officers entered the home. If that is true, the 6:11 p.m. timestamp is not the time of death in any biological sense. It is the time the deaths were officially entered into the record, and the 46 minutes between 5:25 and 6:11 becomes something that needs a procedural explanation that no official statement has yet provided. Why does this matter? Because the timeline of when these deaths occurred is directly connected to the timeline of what could have been seen, what could have been prevented, and what was actually happening in that home while the outside world was operating on a Sunday that everyone who knew this family described as completely ordinary. Thy Mitchell was on the phone with friends Sunday evening. By every account those conversations provided, she sounded exactly like herself. Nothing in her voice, Nothing in her words. Nothing that caused anyone who spoke to her to end that call and think, I need to check on her. And then, at some point after those calls ended, if investigators are correct, something happened in that home that no one on the outside would know about for nearly a full day. That is the timeline. And the gap in the official record, 46 minutes that no authority has explained, sits at the edge of it, pointing at everything that is still not publicly known about what happened in those hours. Now, let me tell you about the people the official record reduced to 4 lines of cause of death documentation, because a forensic report is not a biography. And the distance between those 4 lines and the lives they represent is the part of this case that demands to be said out loud. Here is what is unusual about how this community responded to this tragedy. And I am starting here deliberately, before the biographical details, because how a community responds to a loss tells you something about the person they lost that no resume can capture. Within hours of the Mitchell family's deaths becoming public, the tributes from Houston's restaurant world were not the performative kind. They were the specific kind. The kind where people describe a single moment with a person rather than a general quality. That specificity is the signal. When everyone who knew someone describes the same texture of experience, the same feeling of being genuinely seen, the same sense that this person took your work as seriously as her own, you are not dealing with a professional reputation. You are dealing with a character that left the same mark on every room it entered. Craig Howard, the president of the Houston chapter of the Texas Restaurant Association, had been in the same room as Thy Mitchell just days before her death. She had hosted a board meeting at Traveler's Table, 50 restaurateurs in attendance. Howard described the operation as excellent, the food outstanding, and afterwards said he had found himself sitting across from her thinking, with what he described as genuine certainty, that this woman could one day be the chairman of the association. That is not a generic tribute. That is a person describing a specific thought they had in a specific room at a specific moment. And that room was Traveler's Table, which Thy and Matthew Mitchell had opened in Houston's Montrose neighborhood in 2019, with a menu drawn from their actual travels across the world: Thai, Indian, Nigerian, Australian, American. A table that moved across continents without you leaving your seat. Chef Josie Bendra was in the middle of planning a collaboration dinner with Thy when the news broke. She told reporters that Thy was always on her toes, always planning, always the most supportive person in whatever room she was in, and that she was like that from the very beginning of their relationship, all the way until the very end. Sandy Nguyen, owner of Saigon Hustle and Sunday Press, described her friend as someone who moved with vision and purpose and was unafraid to speak truth while actively lifting the people around her. Lucas Tran, who owns 3 Houston Thai restaurants, said they had started their journeys at almost the same time, chasing similar dreams, and that Thy understood the particular pressure of building something from nothing in a way that most people around her simply did not, and she never let that pressure make her smaller. What all of these accounts share, beyond their warmth, is their specificity. Every person who described Thy Mitchell gave you a scene, not a summary, and the accumulation of those scenes creates a portrait of someone whose consistency was not a performance. It was who she was, every day, in every room. Thy Mai Mitchell was born in Chicago and raised in Houston as a first-generation Vietnamese American. Her earliest understanding of what a restaurant actually was came not from a textbook or a business course. It came from her grandmother and her mother's small Vietnamese restaurant, where she worked weekends as a child. She knew the weight of a kitchen before she knew the vocabulary of business. She understood what it meant to make someone feel fed, genuinely fed, in the way that has nothing to do with calories and everything to do with care. Before any credential she later earned gave her the language for it, she went on to earn her undergraduate degree from the University of Houston. She earned a master's degree in human resources and employment relations from Penn State University. She built a career at the level of Fortune 500 companies in the hospitality and retail sectors, including a position at Hilton, the kind of career arc that takes a decade to build and another decade to leverage. She was, at the time of her death, also reportedly pursuing an MBA at Rice University, 2 restaurants, a clothing brand called Foreign Fare, travel-inspired, wrinkle-resistant, designed for the woman who is always in motion but wants to arrive looking deliberate, 2 children, a third child reportedly on the way, and still in school. In February of 2026, 10 weeks before her death, she appeared on Houston Public Media's Houston Matters program to talk publicly about the financial pressures facing the restaurant industry. She was direct and unguarded in the way people are when they are not managing their image. She talked about what it cost to build something in this market, and she said what she believed about why it was worth it. She said they saw their restaurants as an experience, and that was what set them apart. She said she wanted people to feel like they were getting away when they left their house, rather than just having a random meal. That is the kind of sentence that a person says when they have thought carefully about what they are doing and why. And when the answer to why goes all the way back to a grandmother's restaurant where a child learned what it meant to make someone feel welcome. The Mitchell restaurant empire, by the time of this tragedy, had become exactly what that philosophy built. Traveler's Table was ranked number 2 on Yelp's list of top places to eat in all of Houston in 2025. Number 2 in a city with one of the most competitive and celebrated restaurant cultures in the United States. Traveler's Table had been featured on Guy Fieri's Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives on Food Network in 2021. In 2023, head chef Stanton Bundy competed on Beat Bobby Flay and won. In July of 2025, Chef Miguel Torres from Traveler's Cart appeared on Guy's Grocery Games. In October of 2024, the Mitchells had opened Traveler's Cart, their second location, at 1401 Montrose Boulevard, with a funding round of approximately $2.35 million. In 2025, the Houston chapter of the Texas Restaurant Association named Matthew and Thy the Restaurateurs of the Year. Thy had just been personally invited to join the association's board. The week before her death, she hosted that board meeting inside her own restaurant. That is the external picture, and every single element of it is documented, verified, and real. From the outside, looking at the full public record of what this couple had built, there is not a single data point that signals crisis. Not one. Now let me tell you about Matthew Mitchell, and I want to approach this carefully, not because he deserves protection from scrutiny, but because the scrutiny this case requires is precise, and precision is the only thing that separates an honest investigation from a narrative someone decided on before looking at the evidence. Matthew Mitchell was 52 years old. His life, assembled from public records, his wife's documented accounts of their relationship, and reporting from people who worked alongside him, does not follow a conventional arc. It follows something more unusual, a sequence of complete sealed chapters, each one built from scratch, each one closed behind him with what appears to have been remarkable totality when the next one began. He graduated from Emory University. He then studied in France, Italy, and at Oxford University in England. He worked as a journalist and writer in London, Paris, and New York City. Not briefly, but for years, building a career in that world. And then he left it entirely. He returned to Texas. He enrolled at Rice University's Jesse H. Jones School of Management. He entered the pharmaceutical industry and rose to become president and CEO of the Texas Center for Drug Development, a clinical research company, a position he held for 14 years. 14 years in a single role, at the top of an organization, in an industry that requires a completely different skill set from journalism. And then he left that entirely too. He enrolled at the Art Institute of Houston. He earned a degree in culinary arts. He worked in Houston restaurant kitchens. And in 2019, he opened Traveler's Table with Thy, 4 distinct professional identities across roughly 3 decades. The journalist, the pharmaceutical executive, the culinary student, the restaurateur, each one apparently complete. Each one left behind so thoroughly that the people who knew him in one chapter had almost no knowledge of who he had been in the previous one. The people in his pharmaceutical world knew almost nothing about the journalist. The people in his restaurant world knew almost nothing about the pharmaceutical CEO. Matthew Mitchell understood, with what the record suggests was unusual intentionality, how to close a chapter on himself so completely that almost no one in any chapter held a view of the whole. That is not inherently sinister. Many people reinvent themselves. Many people compartmentalize professionally. But in the context of what HPD says happened on a Sunday night in May of 2026, The pattern raises a question that this case cannot answer and also cannot ignore. How much of what any person who knew Matthew Mitchell knew was the complete picture of who he was, and how much was simply the chapter he had chosen to present to them? There is one specific element of this that has drawn attention from every investigator and analyst who has looked at this case carefully. Matthew Mitchell had no personal social media presence. None. Not a minimal account, not a dormant profile. Zero. His entire public digital existence was mediated through Thai's posts and the restaurant's accounts. He appeared in her photographs. He was mentioned in her captions. He was documented by her. Thai had written about this publicly in an Instagram birthday post in August of 2025, noting with humor that when they first met, she had been convinced he was either a con artist or a man with a secret life, because having no social media at all in 2010 was the kind of thing that made a person suspicious. He just preferred books and newspapers, she wrote. People found it charming. In the context of what the investigation has confirmed, that absence is something different. It means that Matthew Mitchell's own account of his interior life, his own expression of what he was thinking, feeling, or carrying, does not exist in any accessible form. The only record of who he was is the record other people created about him. His former head chef, Stanton Bundy, the man who won on Beat Bobby Flay, told reporters that he had only ever seen Matthew and Thai in a minor disagreement, that he had considered Matthew a great friend, and that after learning what happened, he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. That is not a statement from someone who had been quietly concerned. That is a statement from someone who had been certain, and then had the ground pulled entirely from beneath that certainty. Matthew had dinner plans with friends on Monday evening, May 4th. He had confirmed those plans. His friends arrived. They waited. He never came. And while his friends sat at a table with an empty chair, officers were walking through the front door of the home on Kingston Street. Now let's address what the investigation into motive has and has not produced, because this section requires more precision than most coverage of this case has applied. No official motive has been released. That is the starting point, and it needs to be stated plainly. No suicide note has been publicly confirmed. The full findings of the medical examiner, the complete autopsy documentation, have not been made public. HPD's homicide investigation is active and ongoing. Anyone with information relevant to this investigation has been urged to contact HPD at 713-308-3600. That is the verified official record. What exists outside the official record falls into clearly labeled categories, and the label matters enormously. The first category is confirmed contextual pressure. Thai herself documented it publicly. In February of 2026, she spoke on Houston Public Media about the financial challenges facing restaurant operators. The Traveler's Cart funding round of approximately $2.35 million, which is simultaneously $2.35 million in debt for a location that had been open less than 8 months, is documented. Rising labor costs, food costs, insurance costs, and rent in a competitive Montrose location are documented industry-wide conditions. A Vietnamese language outlet, News HBO 247, reported on what it described as hidden financial pressures specific to the Mitchell operation, though those claims have not been confirmed by HPD, the medical examiner, or any court filing. An editor with direct knowledge of both the industry and this specific couple was explicit with reporters. There is no indication those financial pressures played a role. That person was being deliberate about not drawing a connection the evidence does not support. The financial context exists in the documented record. A causal connection between that context and what happened does not exist in any official statement. The second category is an unverified allegation that has circulated in enough sourced reporting to require acknowledgement. Sources described as close to the case have alleged that in the period before the events of Sunday night, Matthew had been experiencing paranoia. The form that paranoia reportedly took, what anyone around him specifically witnessed, whether anyone recognized it as what it was and chose not to act. None of that has been established in any public record. HPD has not addressed it. The Mitchell family has not addressed it. It is an unverified allegation, named as such, because omitting it from an honest accounting of this investigation would itself be a form of dishonesty. A close friend of the family wrote something publicly after the tragedy that has remained in the coverage of this case because it is the most honest sentence anyone has offered about what this community was trying to hold. She wrote that there were no words for the weight Matthew must have carried. She wrote that this kind of pain does not make sense, and that is what breaks her. She wrote that love was there, and still it was not enough. That is not a defense of anything Matthew Mitchell did. Nothing defends what the official record says he did. It is an acknowledgement, from someone who knew this family from the inside, that whatever was building in the private space of that marriage built in a place that was not visible to anyone who loved them. There is a body of behavioral research that helps frame why a case with this profile, no prior documented violence, no formal warning signs, no record of any kind that any database would have flagged, can still produce this outcome. Researchers who study familicide cases involving perpetrators without documented histories of violence consistently find that the violence in these cases is almost never impulsive. It is planned. The person in the days preceding the event typically presents as calm, sometimes as unusually calm. They maintain their social commitments. They do not cancel plans. They do not behave in ways that alert the people around them. Matthew had dinner plans for Monday night and had not canceled. By every account available, his behavior in the days before May 4th gave no one around him anything specific to name as wrong. This finding, that the violence is planned rather than impulsive, is one of the most important and least discussed aspects of cases like this one. Because it means there was a period of time, the length of which varies case by case, and which investigators in this case have not publicly established, during which what happened on Sunday night was already decided in some internal sense, during which the external life continued, the dinner plans, the professional obligations, the ordinary interactions, while something else was building entirely out of sight. The babysitter who called on Monday did not call because she had witnessed anything alarming. She called because the silence was wrong. She called on instinct built from familiarity, not on evidence built from observation. And that distinction, between what can be felt and what can be documented, is the gap that systems are not built to close. In cases involving high-achieving men specifically, researchers have identified a recurring psychological pattern that does not constitute an explanation but does constitute a framework: the perceived collapse between the identity a man has constructed publicly and what he is experiencing privately. Not necessarily the actual collapse of everything he has built, but the anticipated collapse. The belief, building in silence, that the version of himself that exists in the world is unsustainable. That the gap between who he appears to be and what he is actually carrying is about to become visible in a way that cannot be survived. Matthew Mitchell had built 4 separate and sealed public identities across 3 decades. The final identity, the restaurateur, the husband, the father in River Oaks, was built alongside Thigh. And by every documented measure available for that final chapter, it was Thigh who was visibly ascending. The award in her name, the board invitation, the MBA. The industry watching where she went next. What any of that meant inside the private space of that marriage is not something any record can tell us, and the only person who could have told us made sure he never would. It is also worth naming something that the behavioral research consistently surfaces in cases of this profile: the role of perceived loss of control over a carefully constructed narrative. Matthew Mitchell had not simply built a successful life. He had built 4 of them, each one sealed so completely that the people in one chapter could not speak with any authority about who he had been in the previous one. That level of compartmentalization requires active management. It requires a person who is, at some level, always aware of what each version of himself is showing and what it is not. When the external architecture of a life built on that kind of careful management begins to feel unstable, for whatever reason, financial, psychological, relational, or some combination, the perceived threat is not just to the circumstances, it is to the entire constructed identity. That is the framework researchers have identified. It is not a motive, it is a pattern. And in this case, it is a pattern that fits the available evidence with an exactness that is difficult to ignore and important not to overstate. What was left when the official record was complete was the response of the people Thigh had poured herself into. Ryan Brown, the longtime director of operations for both restaurants, stepped in to lead the operations after the tragedy. The staff of Traveler's Table and Traveler's Cart came in the morning after the family was found and opened the restaurants. They clocked in. They served their community, because that is what they had built in them, not just operational knowledge, but the understanding that hospitality is not a service. It is a choice you make every day about how you show up for the people in front of you. They had learned that from her, and they applied it on the hardest morning any of them had ever faced. Emily Williams Knight, the Texas Restaurant Association's national president, called Thy a ray of light who inspired everyone around her and said that to call her mist would be an understatement. Southhouse PR, the firm that had represented both restaurants, called her not just a client, but a great friend, a devoted mother who was always on her own journey, always looking for the next adventure. Restaurateur. Trang Lele wrote publicly about Thy and then turned in the same post and addressed Matthew directly, saying she could not imagine what he had gone through in his head and that it must have been too much to think straight. That sentence represents what much of the Houston restaurant community has been carrying since May 5th. Grief for Thy and the children sitting alongside something that cannot be reduced to a clean emotion when it comes to Matthew. Because the people who had called him a great friend are still somewhere in the middle of trying to reconcile that friendship with the official record. Now back to where we started. Because this investigation is built around a gap, and the gap has not closed. The Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences documented the time of death for all 4 members of the Mitchell family as 6:11 p.m. on Monday, May 4th, 2026. Officers arrived at 5:25 p.m., 46 minutes. No official explanation. And investigators believe the actual deaths occurred on Sunday night, potentially 18 to 24 hours before officers entered that home, which means the 6:11 timestamp is a documentation time, not a death time. And the window between Sunday night and Monday afternoon, the window in which investigators believe this family was gone while everyone who loved them was going about their Sunday, has no official account of what it contained. That window is where the motive lives. That window is where whatever Matthew Mitchell was carrying finally became something that no one around him survived. And that window has not been publicly explained by any authority connected to this investigation. Here is what remains open as of this reporting. The HPD homicide investigation is active. The full medical examiner findings are not public. The official motive has not been released. The 46-minute gap between dispatch and documented time of death has not been addressed. Whether Thy was pregnant, reported by NBC News, Fox News, and the Daily Mail, sourced from people close to the family, has not been officially confirmed by HPD or the medical examiner. The allegation of paranoia remains unverified and unaddressed by any official source. Every one of these open items is a place where the official record has not yet told the whole story. When any of that changes, True Crime Vault will be here. Every update, every verified development, every time the official record moves in any direction that the public can access. This is the kind of case that deserves to be followed past the headline cycle, and this community has consistently been the one that keeps following. If you are not subscribed, do it right now. Hit the notification bell. You will not miss the next update. And drop a comment below with the question in this case that keeps coming back to you. Because the question that keeps coming back is usually the one the investigation still has not answered. Thy Mitchell was 39 years old. She built 2 of the most celebrated restaurants in Houston. She held leadership roles at Fortune 500 companies. She was pursuing her MBA. She owned a fashion brand. She had been invited to join the board of one of the most respected industry associations in her state. She was planning to travel to Boston for her sister's wedding. On the last Saturday of her life, she spent the afternoon with her 8-year-old daughter at a boutique, choosing a dress. Her daughter rated the dress a 10 out of 10. They had lunch. Her daughter fed her a bite of a cookie. She posted a video about it because she loved her life and the people in it, and she was not afraid to say so. Maya Mitchell was 8 years old. She gave her mother a 10 out of 10. She was found in her bed. Maxwell Mitchell was 4 years old. He was found in his bed. The gap in this case is 46 minutes in the official record, But the gap that matters, the one that no forensic document can fill, is the distance between a Saturday afternoon that a mother thought was just a Saturday afternoon and a Monday evening when Houston Police Department officers entered a home on Kingston Street and the official record began. Everything that happened between those 2 points is what this investigation is still working to explain, and when it does, we will be here.